sixth graders and family. I'm so glad that you are here today for our first Parent Youth Zoom for confirmation. I hope this is a time where you guys get to have some conversation about faith. Now, our sixth graders this year have been studying the Bible, and we have the 5 C's of the Bible, right? Creation, curved in, covenant, Christ, and church. We've talked about creation and curved in, and tonight we're going to start talking about covenant. And actually, covenant is going to be what we focus for the next 4 sessions while you're with your parents. So our big question for tonight is, what is covenant? And to get to that, I want to talk a little bit about where we left off last time. You'll remember that sin had become so big that everything had that evil intent in their hearts, and God flooded the earth and then made that promise to Noah to never flood the earth again. And I said that when we came back here today, that we would find out what God decided to do since God wasn't going to flood the earth again. And here's what God decides to do. God chooses to work through a family to bring out restoration to the world, to heal that gap that we cause when we sin, that gap that's caused when we curve in on ourselves and curve away from God. God chooses to enter into this family. Now, our other big idea for today is that God promises Sarah and Abraham 3 things: land, people, and that their family would be a blessing to all the earth. Land, people, and that their family would be a blessing to all the earth. This is a huge covenantal promise that God makes to them. Now, our 6th graders and leaders are used to the fact that when we gather to hear the story from the Bible, we want to imagine it's like we're hearing it for the first time. And the first hearers of these stories from the Bible would have gathered around a fire. So I have my candle here, and I invite you in your homes to light a candle wherever you are. And while we do that, I want to just talk a moment about one of the ways that I like to think about the Bible. And that's to think of it like a diamond. You know, when you look at a diamond, there's all kinds of facets of a diamond, right? You can look and it can show all these different sides and illuminate something different each time we turn it and look at it a little differently. Every side is beautiful and can be profound. When we have Bible stories, it's the same thing. We can pick up those Bible stories and we can turn them and look at them from all different angles and see beautiful, profound things. So as you listen to this first scene for our Bible story tonight, I want you to get those papers out, a blank sheet of paper and some writing utensils, crayons, markers, colored pencils, pens, whatever you like. And as you listen to the story, I want you to write down or draw a picture of what you see and hear. Now, we call this imaginative listening. And imaginative listening is letting our minds get caught on different things and noting that when our mind gets stopped. It's almost as if you're watching the story go through your mind like you're watching a movie play in your head. These are the kinds of ways that we've been listening to the Bible, and I invite parents to do the same thing. So let's begin with scene 1 for tonight. It's called Covenant. Generations after Noah, people filled the land again. And humans, just like before, began to follow their own disruptive ways. They conspired to build this brick tower all the way up to the heavens and to show that they were their own gods. But even in their rebellion, God did not give up on humans. In fact, God made a covenant, a deep promise and relational bond with a man and a woman, with Abram and Sarai. God promised Abram, I will bless you and make your name known throughout history. Your family will become this great nation, and I will bless and protect them. And it's through this people, this great nation I'm going to build, I will extend my whole blessing onto the entire world. This was an amazing promise, but there was a problem because Abram's wife, Sarai, she wasn't able to have children. And they were both getting old. I mean, Sarah was already 65. And no, Abram was already 75. So how would God bless the entire world through their family if they couldn't even have one child? So God told Abram, to receive my promise, leave your country, leave your relatives, and move to this new land that I'm going to show you. And Abram and Sarai did. They chose to leave the safety of their homeland to follow God, even though they didn't know where God was leading them. And after all these weeks of travel, Abram was standing on top of a hill, looking out over this big area. And God said to Abram, look as far as you can see in every direction. I'm giving you this land to you and to your future descendants. Trees and green pastures filled this countryside, and Abraham and Sarai settled in this place, which would be called the Promised Land. A few years later, Abram and Sarah began to wonder if God's promise to have a child would ever come true. And Abram asked God, God, what good is it if you've given me all of this, but I don't have a son to pass it on to? I am getting old, God, and soon I'll have to give all of this stuff to one of my servants. And God replied to Abram, I've promised you and Sarai a son. Abram, look up at the stars, look up at the sky, and try and count all of the stars you see in the sky. That's how many descendants you are going to have. Too many to count. And as Abram looked up at the star-filled night, Abram chose to trust God, even though it seemed impossible. And God was pleased with Abram. Scene 2, it's called Laughter. So 10 years passed with no sign of a child, and Sarai arranged for Abram to have a child with her servant Hagar. You know, in this kind of culture back then, it was a normal kind of thing. It wasn't that unusual at all. And so after Hagar becomes pregnant with Abram's son, Hagar begins to kind of hate Sarai. And so Sarah goes to Abram and complains, this is your fault. I gave you my servant and now she treats me horribly. And Abram replied, she's your servant. Do whatever you want with her. Then Sarai treated Hagar so harshly that Hagar ran off into the wilderness. And as Hagar stopped by a spring of water, she began to weep, as I think I would. And an angel approached Hagar and said, you must return to Sarai. God will bless you with more descendants than you can count. They will become a great nation of their own. They will have a great leader of their own. Your son will be called Ishmael, which means God hears. God hears your cries and cares for you. So Hagar returns and she gives birth to Abram's son Ishmael, and 10 more years pass and Sarai still doesn't have her own child. And so suddenly God appears to Abram, who then falls face on the ground, right? And God says to Abram, my promise to you will come true. I'm going to change your names. And from now on, you'll be called Abraham and Sarah, which means father and mother of many nations. Because remember, I will always be your God, and you, Abram and Sarah, you will always be my special people. And Abram and Sarah, they just kind of laughed and chuckled to themselves, thinking, yeah, oh, okay, God. Right? It was pretty impossible when we were 65, and now 20 more years have passed. And Abram wondered, how can I become a father at 100 years old? And how can Sarah have a baby when she's almost 90? Sarah thought, how can a worn out woman like me have a baby? And my husband is even older than I am. But God said, why do you laugh? Is anything too hard for me? You will see, a year from now, you will have a son. Sure enough, a year later, Sarah gives birth to their son, and they name him Isaac, which means laughter. After her son was born, Sarah giggled. Who would have dreamed we'd have a child when we've been this old? God has brought us everything, and everyone who hears about this laughter. It had taken 25 years, but God's promise to give Abraham and Sarah their own son had come true. God promised that through their family, they would become a new kind of people, called to extend God's blessing to the entire earth. And this family would be called the Hebrews. And later, they would be called the people of Israel, a name that means struggler with God. Soon we'll hear more about why they were given that unique name.